大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。 有一种作家，他从不写史诗，他从不写宏大的历史，他只写一个小镇，一个女人的一生，几段说不清楚的心事。但当你读完之后，你会觉得整个世界都被他装进去了。这个人叫爱丽丝孟若，她是加拿大的骄傲，她是诺贝尔文学奖得主，她被称为当代短篇小说的大师。但她自己说，她只是在写她认识的那些女人。今天的故事从一个叫温厄姆的地方开始。1931年7月10日，加拿大安大略省西南部一个叫温厄姆的农业小镇，爱丽丝·安莱德洛在这里出生。父亲罗伯特·莱德洛是农民，他养银狐，那是一种毛皮生意。在那个年代，毛皮贸易还是加拿大乡村的重要收入来源。母亲安克拉克曾是老师，她受过良好的教育，她热爱文学，她把这份热爱传给了女儿。但是不久之后，母亲患上了帕金森氏症，那是一种进行性的神经系统疾病，身体会慢慢失去控制，手会颤抖，走路会变得困难，说话也会越来越不清楚。在爱丽丝还小的时候，母亲的病就已经让家庭的气氛沉重起来。那个沉重，那个看着最爱的人慢慢消失的感受，后来在爱丽丝的很多故事里都出现过。温厄姆那个年代的生活，你要好好想象一下，那是1930年代到40年代，加拿大正在从大萧条的阴影里慢慢走出来。农村的生活很艰苦，电力刚刚进入农村，汽车是奢侈品，女人的世界基本上就是家里的那几个房间。那个年代的加拿大农村，女人的命运几乎是固定的，嫁人、生孩子、照顾家庭，然后慢慢老去。如果你聪明，那也只是你做家事做得更有效率，没有人会问你有什么梦想。但是爱丽丝从小就是个异类，她读书，她写故事，她把自己的想象力当成逃跑的工具。放学回家的路上，她脑子里已经在编故事了。吃饭的时候她在想故事，晚上睡不着的时候她在想故事。她后来说过一句话，我从小就知道，如果我不离开这里，我会成为另一个被困住的女人。10几岁的爱丽丝开始偷偷写小说，她怕被人笑，所以她告诉同学她是在读书，但其实她是在写那些她观察到的女人，写那些没有人注意到的心事，写那些在厨房里沉默的故事。她写得非常快，因为她害怕被人发现，她要在被人打扰之前把故事写完。那种抢时间的习惯，后来成了她一辈子的创作方式。有一件事特别值得说，爱丽丝在读中学的时候，有一个老师发现了她的天赋。那个老师鼓励她继续写作，说她有不寻常的才能。这对一个在小镇长大的女孩来说，是非常重要的认可，因为周围的人大多不理解她在做什么。写故事又不能赚钱，女孩子好好找个男人嫁了才是正事。但爱丽丝没有放弃写作，她继续写，继续读，继续把自己装在一个别人看不到的世界里。1949年，爱丽丝以奖学金进入西安大略大学，她念的是新闻和英文，但她真正在意的是写作。她在大学里像一块海绵，拼命吸收所有的文学养分。她读了大量的英国文学，读了大量的美国文学，也读了很多俄国文学，契诃夫、屠格涅夫、托尔斯泰，那些俄国作家对她影响很深，特别是契诃夫，他让她看到了短篇小说可以有多深，可以在那么短的篇幅里装下那么多的人生。在大学里，她认识了詹姆斯·孟若，他是个书商，温文儒雅，对文学有热情，两个人很快坠入爱河。1951年，爱丽丝因为奖学金用完必须辍学，她20岁，嫁给了詹姆斯·孟若，跟着他搬到不列颠哥伦比亚省的维多利亚，开始了家庭主妇的生活。那是一段漫长的沉默，4个孩子陆续出生了，家务永无止境。她没有自己的书房，她没有自己的办公桌， 他没有任何属于自己的空间，他只有孩子睡着之后的那几个小时，那是他唯一的写作时间。你想象一下那个画面，深夜里，一个女人坐在厨房桌子旁，孩子终于都睡了，整个屋子终于安静了。她打开一个笔记本，开始写，但不知道什么时候孩子会哭醒，也不知道什么时候丈夫会进来问她在做什么，所以她写得很快。她把所有要说的话都塞进去，一句一句，尽可能的简短，尽可能的有力量。这种被迫的简短，后来成了她的风格。她后来说，我是在孩子睡觉的时候写作的，我在厨房桌子上写，我在孩子生病的夜晚写，我用所有能偷来的时间写。那种偷来的时间里，她的第一批短篇小说慢慢成型，一篇一篇，没有人知道，没有人在意。她把写好的故事投稿给杂志，收到拒绝信，再收到拒绝信，但她从来没有停止过。1956年，她在加拿大的杂志上发表了第一篇短篇小说，那年她25岁，发表之后没有引起太大的注意，但对她来说那是一个重要的起点。她的名字第一次出现在印刷品上，她是一个作家了。此后她继续写，继续投稿，继续被拒绝，继续写，那个循环重复了很多年。1963年，他和詹姆斯在维多利亚开了一家书店，书店的名字叫孟若书店。那家书店后来成了维多利亚的文化地标，现在还在，已经开了超过60年了。如果你有机会去维多利亚，一定要去看看那家书店，那里面有很多孟若的书，有他的故事，也有他的影像。开书店让他接触到更多的文学，让他认识了更多的作家和读者。但是书店的工作也很忙碌，他的写作时间反而更少了，他更必须把时间挤出来。1968年，一切改变了。爱丽丝37岁，她的第一本短篇小说集出版了，书名叫做《快乐影子之舞》。那个书名就有一种独特的诗意，快乐和影子放在一起，暗示着快乐背后总有阴影。那正是孟若故事的本质。出版之后，加拿大文坛震动了，那本书拿下了加拿大最重要的文学奖——总督文学奖。那是他第一次拿，后来他还会再拿2次、3次总督文学奖，在加拿大文学史上是非常少见的成就。评论家说，这些故事太真实了，真实到让人不舒服，但又真实到让人停不下来。有一个评论家说，读孟若的故事，就像有人突然把你房间的灯全部打开，你看到了一直都在那里但你从来没有看清楚的东西。孟若的故事有一种特别的力量，她写的是普通女人的生活，但她写出了那种生活里面难以言说的矛盾，那种既爱又恨的感情，那种既想逃又走不了的困境，那种在日复一日的家务劳动里慢慢失去自己的感受。她的文字不华丽，没有炫耀性的修辞，没有故意的词藻堆砌，但每一个字都有重量，每一句话都有温度。读她的故事，你会感觉有人完全懂你，懂那些你从来说不出口的感受。1971年，她出版了第2本书，书名叫做《生命中的女孩与女人》，主角是一个叫戴尔·乔丹的年轻女孩。那个女孩住在一个叫做朱比利的小镇，那个小镇就是温厄姆的化身。书里面有戴尔的母亲，有他的邻居，有他的老师，有他的第一段爱情，有他想离开小镇的渴望，也有他离开之后回望小镇的复杂心情。很多读者说，那是他最有自传性质的作品，因为里面太多东西像是真实的回忆。1972年，爱丽丝和詹姆斯的婚姻走到尽头，他们离婚了。爱丽丝带着孩子回到安大略省，在格尔夫大学担任住校作家。后来她嫁给了地理学家杰拉德·弗雷林，搬到安大略省的克林顿小镇，在那里定居下来。那个小镇成为她后半生的创作基地。她在那里过着非常低调的生活，去图书馆，去杂货店，和邻居聊天， 然后回家写作。你知道吗？孟若的故事几乎都设定在安大略省西南部，那个地方叫做安大略湖区。他把那一带叫做他的乡村，就像美国作家福克纳有他的约克纳帕塔法县，他有他的安大略西南部，那里有小农场，有教堂，有杂货店，有八卦，有秘密，有哪些表面平静内心波涛汹涌的女人。孟若说，我想写的不是什么大事件，我想写的是那些每天发生的小事，那些小事里面藏住人的一生。这句话后来成了他创作哲学的核心，在最小的地方找到最大的故事。1978年，他出版了《你以为你是谁》，这本书让他在加拿大的地位更加稳固。书名本身就是一个有力量的问句，你以为你是谁？那是很多小镇女孩从小听到大的质问。当你想要更多的时候，当你想要离开的时候，总有人用这个问句把你拉回来。爱丽丝把那个问句变成了书名，那是一种反抗，也是一种解放。1982年，她出版了《木星的卫星》，这本书让她走出了加拿大，开始进入国际文坛的视野。美国的编辑开始注意她，纽约客杂志开始刊登她的故事。那是当时全世界最重要的短篇小说平台，能在纽约客发表作品，就等于获得全世界文坛的认可。在那个年代，很多最重要的短篇小说作家都是通过纽约客走向全世界的。从那时候起，孟若几乎每年都在纽约客发表故事，一直持续了几十年。他是纽约客历史上发表作品最多的作家之一。他的故事有一个特色，让很多读者困惑，也让很多读者着迷。他的时间线不是线性的，他会在故事的中间突然跳到30年后，然后再跳回来，再跳到另一个时间点。那种跳跃不是混乱，那是他刻意设计的结构。他说，人的记忆不是按照时间排列的，记忆是按照情感排列的。某一个气味，某一个声音，可以把你带回30年前。我的故事也是这样工作的。这种时间结构让他的短篇小说有了长篇小说的深度。有人说，读一篇孟若的故事等于读了一部完整的人生。1986年，他出版了《爱的进程》，那本书里的故事一篇一篇都像一个完整的世界，每一个主角都有自己的过去，自己的秘密，自己说不清楚的渴望。那本书让西方文坛终于意识到，短篇小说不是长篇小说的前置练习，短篇小说有它自己的美学，有它自己的力量，那种力量有时候比长篇更深。1990年，他出版了《朋友与情人的朋友》。1994年，他出版了《开放的秘密》。书名里的开放的秘密是一个意义丰富的词组，每个人都知道，但每个人都假装不知道，那正是小镇生活的本质。2001年，他出版了《爱亦有情求爱情爱婚姻》，这个书名本身就是一个有趣的语言游戏，把关系的各种形态全部列出来，让你看到人与人之间的连结有多少种可能，又有多少种限制。这本书后来被改编成电影，2006年由导演莎拉波利执导，电影的名字叫做《你再也不认识我》。那部电影非常成功，获得了奥斯卡最佳改编剧本提名，让更多人知道了爱丽丝孟若这个名字。孟若的作品被翻译成超过40种语言，她的故事在世界各地被读、被研究、被教授，但她本人很低调。她住在小镇里，她不常接受访问。她说她不喜欢谈论自己的作品，她喜欢让故事自己说话。有记者问她，你觉得你的读者从你的故事里得到了什么？她想了很久，然后说，我希望他们得到了一种感觉，那种感觉是，他们一直以为自己是孤独的，但他们不是，有人懂他们，有人也是这样感受世界的。这句话让很多记者落泪了。2009年，他出版了《太多幸福》，这本书的同名故事写的是19世纪俄国数学家索菲亚科瓦列夫斯卡娅，她是历史上第一位在西方大学取得教授职位的女性。 她同时是数学家和作家，她的一生充满了矛盾和壮烈。孟若被她深深吸引，花了很多时间研究她的生平，写出了这篇跨越时代的故事。2012年，她出版了《亲爱的生命》，这是她最后一本短篇小说集。在序言里，她说这可能是她最后的作品了。她当时已经81岁。她说她已经把想说的都说了。她说她累了。她说她想要休息了。那本书的最后4篇故事，是她最接近回忆录的作品。她写到了自己的童年，写到了母亲的病，写到了她如何在那个小镇上学会观察人，学会把人的故事收藏在心里，然后在几十年后再拿出来细细观看。然后2013年10月10日，诺贝尔文学奖宣布了。那一天，爱丽丝孟若正在女儿家，电话响了，是瑞典打来的。她后来说她以为是诈骗电话，因为对方说话有奇怪的口音，她差点把电话挂掉。瑞典皇家学院说，他是短篇小说的大师，他把这个文学形式发挥到了前所未有的高度。他让人想起契诃夫。那一年，他82岁，是最年长的诺贝尔文学奖得主之一，也是加拿大历史上第一个获得诺贝尔文学奖的人。消息传出去，整个加拿大沸腾了。温厄姆小镇的人们出来庆祝，孟若书店的门口挤满了人，每个人都在说，他是我们的人，他是从我们这里走出去的。那些曾经问过他你以为你是谁的人，现在终于知道了答案。诺贝尔委员会在颁奖典礼上说，孟若的作品让人想起契诃夫，那是最高的赞美，因为契诃夫是短篇小说史上最伟大的名字之一。但孟若有她自己的独特性，她写的是女性，她写的是现代女性在传统和解放之间的挣扎，她写的是那些说不出口的欲望，那些压抑在日常生活之下的暗流。她曾经说过一句话让很多女性读者落泪，她说，女人的生命里充满了不可能被记住的时刻，我想让这些时刻被记住。这句话解释了她为什么要写作，也解释了为什么她的作品如此打动人心。她不只是在讲故事，她是在为那些被遗忘的声音建立一座纪念碑。孟若的创作生涯超过50年，她一共出版了14本短篇小说集，外加1本接近长篇小说的作品。她从不写长篇，她说她不擅长长篇，她说她的思维是短篇的，她喜欢那种在有限篇幅里让故事发光的感觉。但她的每一个短篇都有长篇的重量。有文学评论家研究过孟若的技术，他们发现她有几个非常独特的写作方法。第一个叫做时间折叠，她不按照时间顺序说故事，她把不同时间的片段像折纸一样折叠在一起，让读者在时间里面穿梭。一个故事可能从现在开始，突然跳到30年前，再跳到20年后，那种跳跃让你感受到时间的不均匀，感受到记忆的非线性。第二个叫做省略的力量，他不说所有的事情，他留下很多空白让读者自己填补。那些空白往往比说出来的话更有力量，因为每个读者填入的东西都不一样，那个空白变成了每个读者自己的故事。第三个叫做转折的艺术，他的故事往往在最后几段突然转向，那个转向不是惊喜，那是一种更深的真实浮现了出来，就像你以为你已经看懂了一幅画，但突然有人把灯光调亮了一点，你才发现那幅画里还有另一层。读孟若需要一种特别的耐心，你不能快读，你要慢慢读，让她的语言在你脑子里慢慢展开，就像一朵花在慢镜头里开放。2013年拿到诺贝尔奖之后，孟若说她要退休了，她说她老了，她的眼睛不好了，她想休息了。她确实退休了，她住在安大略省的小镇里，过着安静的生活，有时候去图书馆，有时候和朋友吃饭，但是她不再写新的作品了，但她的书还在被读，还在被研究，还在影响着新一代的作家。很多当代最重要的短篇小说家都承认孟若是他们的老师。 他们说读孟若就是上了最好的写作课。美国作家裘帕拉西利说，孟若让他明白了短篇小说可以有多深。英国作家伊恩·麦克尤恩说，孟若是这个时代最重要的英语作家之一。美国作家强纳生·法兰曾说，他是他最敬佩的作家。那些称赞他的作家本身都是当代文坛的顶尖人物，他们对孟若的尊敬，说明了他在文学史上的地位有多特殊。2024年，爱丽丝·孟若辞世，享寿92岁。世界各地的读者和作家表达了深深的哀悼。加拿大总理说，他是加拿大最伟大的声音之一，他的故事将永远活在世界各地的读者心中。纽约客杂志说，他改变了短篇小说的历史，他让这个文学形式得到了他应有的尊重。那些读过他故事的普通读者们，在网络上留下了无数的悼念文字。很多人说他的故事陪伴了我整个成年生活。很多人说在最孤独的时候，是他的故事让我感到有人懂我。他走了，但他的故事还在。那些住在安大略小镇里的女人，那些说不出口的心事，那些被折叠在时间里的记忆，都还在他的文字里活着。孟若给创作者最重要的启示是什么？是这一句话：你不需要宏大的题材，你只需要深入你最熟悉的那个小世界。那个小世界里藏着整个人类的故事。他一辈子都在写那个他长大的小镇，那些农场，那些教堂，那些厨房，那些女人。但他写出了全人类共同的孤独，共同的渴望，共同的挣扎。那就是伟大文学的力量，把最小的放到最大的容器里，让每一个读到的人都在里面看到自己。下次你觉得自己的故事太平凡，太渺小，不值得被说出来的时候，记住爱丽丝·孟若，记住那个在厨房桌子上偷偷写作的女人，记住她用那些被偷来的时间，写出了全世界最深的短篇故事。你的生活里也有那个故事，只要你愿意去找。谢谢你今天跟我一起认识了这位伟大的女作家。我是 Jenny， 我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I am Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. There is a particular kind of writer whose greatness is easy to overlook at first glance. She never writes epic novels spanning centuries. She never writes sweeping historical narratives about kings and wars. She writes about a small town in Canada. She writes about a lifetime of quiet moments between ordinary people. She writes about feelings that are nearly impossible to put into words. But when you finish reading one of her stories, you feel as though the entire world, all of its beauty and sadness and longing, has somehow been compressed into a handful of pages. Her name is Alice Munro. She is the greatest literary figure that Canada has ever produced. She is a Nobel Prize laureate in literature. She is widely regarded as the undisputed master of the contemporary short story form. But she herself never claimed any of those titles. She simply said she was writing about the women she grew up knowing. Today the story begins in a small farming community called Wingham. On July 10, 1931, in the southwestern part of Ontario, Canada, a small agricultural town called Wingham, Alison Laidlaw was born into a farming family there. Her father, Robert Eric Laidlaw, raised silver foxes for their fur. In that era, the fur trade was still a significant source of rural income in Canada. Her mother, Anne Clark Laidlaw, had worked as a schoolteacher before marriage. She was an educated woman who loved literature and passed that passion directly to her daughter. But the happiness of those early years did not last. Before Alice had grown very old, her mother began showing signs of Parkinson's disease. This is a progressive neurological illness in which the body gradually loses its ability to control its own movements. The hands tremble. The gait becomes unsteady. The voice grows harder to understand. In those years, there was no effective treatment for this condition. The family could only watch as the woman they loved slowly changed before their eyes. This experience of quiet devastation, of watching someone disappear while still being present, left a permanent mark on the imagination of Alice and would surface again and again in her fiction for the rest of her life. To understand Alice Munro, you need to understand what life was like in rural Ontario in the 1930s and 1940s. Canada was slowly pulling itself out of the Great Depression. The countryside was poor and isolated. Electricity had only recently arrived in farming communities. A car was a luxury that many families could not afford. For women especially, the world was defined by strict and unspoken limits. The expectation was simple and total. You got married, you raised children, you kept the house, and you grew old. If you happened to be intelligent, that intelligence was channeled into making your housework more efficient. No one asked a farm girl in Wingham what her ambitions might be. No one was supposed to ask. But Alice was never willing to accept those limits. From a very young age, she was different. She read obsessively and constantly. She invented stories in her head while walking home from school. She lay awake at night building imaginary worlds. She used her imagination the way other people use a door, as a way to get out of a place that felt too small for her. She later spoke about knowing, almost from childhood, that if she did not leave Wingham behind, she would become what she feared most. Another woman who had been contained by the town. Another life that had folded in on itself without ever opening fully. As a teenager, Alice began to write her stories down secretly. She was afraid of ridicule, so she told people she was reading when she was actually writing. She filled notebooks with characters drawn from real observation. The women she watched in the grocery store and the church and at family dinners. The things they left unsaid. The feelings they carried but never named. She wrote with urgency and speed, because she knew she could be interrupted at any moment. That habit of writing quickly, of compressing maximum meaning into the smallest possible space, later became one of the defining qualities of her literary style. One important thing happened when Alice was in secondary school. A teacher recognized something exceptional in her writing and told her so directly. That teacher said Alice had a rare and unusual talent. For a girl in a small Ontario farming town in the 1940s, being told by an adult and authority that your gift was real and valuable was an experience that could sustain you for years. Because almost everyone else was telling her, implicitly or explicitly, that writing stories was not a serious occupation for a woman, that she should focus on more practical matters. Alice did not listen to that advice. She kept writing and kept reading. She withdrew into her interior world while still living outwardly in Wingham. In 1949, Alice earned a scholarship to the University of Western Ontario. She enrolled to study journalism and English literature, but her real education during those years was in reading. She absorbed British literature with the hunger of someone who had been starved for it. She discovered American writing, and she fell deeply in love with Russian literature, Chekhov above all others. Anton Chekhov, who had proved a century earlier in Russia that the short story could contain as much truth as any long novel. That ordinary people in provincial places could be the subjects of serious literary art. That restraint and compression could achieve effects that expansiveness never could. Reading Chekhov was a revelation for Alice. It confirmed what she already believed intuitively, that the most profound stories were often the quietest ones. At the University of Western Ontario she also met James Munro. He was a young man who sold books and loved literature. He was gentle and thoughtful and enthusiastic about ideas. The two fell in love and began planning a future together. In 1951, when her scholarship money ran out, Alice was faced with a hard choice. She could not continue at university without financial support. She was 20 years old, in love, and without obvious alternatives. She married James Munro and moved with him to Victoria, British Columbia. And she began what would become a long and complicated life as a homemaker. What followed was a silence that stretched across years. For children were born and raised. The rhythms of domestic life absorbed almost all of her time and energy. She had no desk, no studio, no dedicated space of any kind. She had no room of her own in the sense that Virginia Woolf had famously said every woman writer needed. She only had the hours after the children fell asleep. Those hours were hers alone. And she used every one of them. Imagine the picture she described years later. Late at night. A woman at the kitchen table with a notebook open in front of her. The house finally still. Writing as quickly and quietly as possible. Stopping at the sound of a child stirring. Starting again when the house went silent. Never sure how long she had before the next interruption. So she packed everything she needed to say into very short sentences. Because short sentences could be completed before someone needed her. Because short sentences could hold a complete thought in a small space. That practical constraint shaped her style permanently. The compressed, precise, emotionally weighted sentences that became her signature were not a literary choice she made in some comfortable study. They were a survival technique developed at a kitchen table in the middle of the night. She later described those years with characteristic directness. She said she wrote while her children were sleeping. She wrote at the kitchen table because that was the only surface available to her. She wrote on the nights when a sick child kept her awake anyway. She used every stolen moment she could find. In those hours, story by story, her first body of work slowly accumulated. She submitted pieces to Canadian magazines and collected rejection letters. She revised and submitted again. The cycle of rejection and persistence went on for years. Nobody was paying attention. Nobody told her she was getting closer. She kept going anyway. The persistence required to keep writing through years of rejection, while simultaneously raising children, managing a household, and later running a bookshop, was not something that came from any romantic notion of artistic suffering. It came from something more fundamental. She simply could not write. The compulsion was as basic as breathing. The stories were there, pressing to be told, and she had to tell them. That is the defining characteristic of a true writer. Not talent, not ambition, but that particular inability to stop. In 1956, a Canadian magazine accepted and published her first short story. She was 25 years old. The publication did not cause any stir or attract any real attention. But it was a decisive moment in her interior life. For the first time, her name appeared in print. The word had been made public. She was, in some tangible and verifiable sense, a writer. The persistence required to keep writing through years of rejection, while simultaneously raising children, managing a household, and later running a bookshop, was not something that came from any romantic notion of artistic suffering. It came from something more fundamental. She simply could not stop writing. The compulsion was as basic as breathing. The stories pressed to be told, and she had to tell them. That is the defining characteristic of a serious writer. Not talent alone, not ambition alone, but that particular inability to stop. The absolute need to find the shape of what you see and feel and know, and to make it available to someone else. She continued writing and submitting over the following years. Continued being rejected. Continued starting again. In 1963, she and James opened a bookshop in Victoria. The shop was called Munro's Books. It became an important cultural gathering place in that city. It is still operating today, more than 60 years after it first opened. If you ever find yourself in Victoria, British Columbia, that bookshop is worth visiting for its own sake. The staff there can tell you stories about the woman who helped create it. Running a bookshop kept Alice connected to the literary world she loved. But it also meant she had even less time to write. The stolen hours became shorter and fewer. The urgency of her writing increased accordingly. In 1968, after nearly 2 decades of effort, everything changed. Alice was 37 years old when her first collection of short stories was published. The book was called Dance of the Happy Shades. The title carries a beautiful and slightly unsettling resonance. Happy alongside shades, which suggests both shadows and the dead. The combination implies that happiness is always accompanied by its opposite. That light and darkness are inseparable. This is the essence of everything Munro would write for the rest of her life. The publication of that book shook the Canadian literary establishment. The stories in that first collection came from the accumulated observations of years. Characters who felt like living people rather than literary constructions. Women who had never appeared in Canadian fiction before. Farm women, small-town women, women with inner lives of extraordinary complexity. Living inside circumstances that seemed to deny the existence of such complexity. The gap between the richness of the inner life and the narrowness of the outer circumstances. That gap is where all of her energy lives. It is the source of the particular electricity in her writing. Readers recognize themselves in those characters. Not just Canadian readers, not just women readers, but readers everywhere who had ever felt that the life available to them was smaller than the life they contained. It won the Governor-General Literary Award, the most prestigious prize in Canadian letters. That was the first time she won it. She would win it 2 more times over the course of her career. 3 Governor-General Awards is an extraordinary distinction in Canadian literary history. Critics competed to describe what was so unusual about these stories. Many said they were too real to be comfortable. Real in the way that makes you want to look away, but compelling in a way that makes it impossible to stop reading. One critic described the experience of reading her work as having all the lights in a room suddenly switched on at full brightness. You see everything that was always there, but that you had protected yourself from seeing clearly. This description captures something essential about what Munro does. She does not invent monsters or catastrophes. She illuminates the ordinary. And the ordinary, under her light, turns out to contain everything. The stories are about women. About the contradictions that women carry inside lives that are supposed to be simple and contained. The love that becomes resentment. the freedom that is always just out of reach. The desire to leave that coexists with the inability to go. The slow erosion of self that can happen inside years of domestic routine. Her sentences are not decorative. She has no interest in displaying her own cleverness. Every word she puts on the page is doing necessary work. Every sentence is carrying exactly what it needs to carry and nothing more. When you read her, you feel understood in a way that is almost alarming. She knows what you have felt but never said. She knows the feelings that seem too complicated or too shameful to articulate. And she says them, clearly and without apology. In 1971, she published her second book. It was called Lives of Girls and Women. This work is structured like a novel but reads like linked stories. The main character, a girl named Dell Jordan, grows up in a fictional Ontario town called Jubilee. Jubilee is Wingham, recognizably and specifically. The book follows Dell through childhood and adolescence. Through her relationship with her eccentric, independent-minded mother. Through her first experiences of love and desire. Through her gradual understanding of what the town expects of her. And through her fierce, private determination to escape those expectations. Many readers have described this as the most autobiographical of all her works. Because so much of what Dell feels and observes rings with the specificity of genuine memory. In 1972, the marriage of Alice to James came to an end after more than 20 years. They divorced. Alice returned to Ontario with her children. She accepted a position as writer-in-residence at the University of Guelph. Later she met and married Gerald Fremlin, a geographer. They settled in the small town of Clinton, in southwestern Ontario. And there she stayed for the rest of her creative life. That small town became the center of her literary universe. She lived there quietly, without drama or performance. She went to the library and the grocery store. She talked with neighbors. She paid attention to everything. And she went home and wrote. What she wrote about, almost always, was the part of Ontario she grew up in. The southwestern region, with its farms and small towns and flat landscapes. She sometimes called it her country. Just as the American writer William Faulkner had his mythical Yoknapatawpha County in Mississippi. Alice Munro had her southwestern Ontario. This region had everything she needed. Small farms on the edge of financial precarity. Protestant churches and the particular social pressures that surrounded them. General stores and the gossip that circulated through them. Secrets that everyone knew and no one mentioned. And women, countless women, carrying lives full of unacknowledged feeling. Munro once tried to explain why she kept returning to this same territory. She said she had no interest in writing about grand events or historical turning points. What interested her was the small events of daily life. Because inside those small events, she believed, an entire human life is hidden. This belief became the central principle of her art. In the smallest of places, find the greatest of stories. In 1978, she published Who Do You Think You Are?, which appeared in the United States under the title The Beggar Maid. That title is itself a statement. Who do you think you are? Every person who has ever wanted more than their circumstances permitted has heard some version of that question. It is the question that small places ask of ambitious people. It is the question that was asked of Alice Munro throughout her early life. By naming her book after that question, she was answering it. In 1982, she published The Moons of Jupiter. This collection marked the moment when the international literary world began to pay serious attention. American editors took notice. The New Yorker magazine, which had long been the most important venue for short fiction in the English-speaking world, began publishing her stories. To appear in the New Yorker was to receive a kind of validation that reached across every literary boundary. From that point on, she published there almost every year for several decades. She became one of the most frequent contributors to that magazine in its entire long history. Her work began to accumulate a distinctive reputation among serious readers. People talked about the experience of reading her stories. How disorienting and strange the time structure could feel at first. How a story might begin in the present and then, without warning, leap 30 years into the past. Or forward into the future. And then move again, to another time entirely. The reader is never quite sure where in time they are standing. This was not a formal experiment or a stylistic game. It was her response to a deep conviction about how human consciousness actually works. She believed that memory does not organize itself chronologically. Memory organizes itself around emotion. A smell, a quality of afternoon light, a particular phrase, can return you instantly to a moment 30 years in the past. Can make the past feel more real than the present. Her stories replicate that experience on the page. They move through time the way memory moves. Which is to say, they move in ways that feel irrational but are deeply true. This temporal technique gave her short stories a density and complexity that most novels never achieve. Many critics and writers have noted that reading a single Munro story can feel like reading an entire life. Because in a sense, that is exactly what you are doing. In 1986 she published The Progress of Love. This collection established her international reputation beyond any doubt. Each story in the book is its own complete world. Every character has a past, a weight of history, a set of unspoken desires. The Western literary establishment, which had long treated the short story as a minor form, a form of apprenticeship on the way to the serious work of novels, was forced to confront the possibility that it had been wrong about this for a very long time. In 1990 she published Friend of My Youth. In 1994, she published Open Secrets. That title phrase is worth pausing over. An open secret is something everyone knows but no one acknowledges. It is the social contract of small towns, where survival depends on collective pretending. Munro understood this mechanism perfectly. She had grown up inside it. In 2001, she published Hateship, Friendship, Courtship, Loveship, Marriage. That long title is itself a kind of poem. It lists all the possible configurations of human attachment, and quietly suggests how easily one can be mistaken for another. How what begins as one thing can transform, over time, into something entirely different. That collection was later adapted for cinema by the Canadian filmmaker Sarah Polley. The film, released in 2006, was titled Away from Her. It told the story of a long marriage shaken by one partner descending into Alzheimer's disease. It was a beautifully made film that received an Academy Award nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay. And it introduced the name Alice Munro to many readers who had not yet discovered her. By this point in her career, her works had been translated into more than 40 languages. Her stories were taught at universities across North America, Europe, and elsewhere. She had received honorary degrees from numerous institutions. Awards from Canada, the United States, and beyond had accumulated steadily. But she lived quietly in her small town, as she always had. She declined most interview requests. She rarely appeared at literary festivals. She did not maintain a public presence or cultivate a literary persona. She said she preferred to let the work speak without her standing beside it explaining things. One journalist who did manage to interview her asked what she hoped readers took away from her stories. She thought for a long time before answering. Then she said she hoped readers came away with a particular feeling. The feeling that they had always believed themselves to be alone in what they felt. But that they were not. That someone else had felt the same things. Had noticed the same things. Had found those things worth saying. That answer, simple and honest as it is, explains everything about why her work matters. In 2009 she published Too Much Happiness. The long title story of that collection was about Sofia Kovalovskaya, a 19th-century Russian mathematician who became the first woman in Western Europe to hold a full professorship at a major university. Kovalovskaya was also a novelist, a figure of extraordinary intellectual ambition. Living in a time when the ambitions of women were systematically obstructed, Munro spent years reading about her life before writing this story. The choice of subject reveals something important about her own preoccupations. She was always drawn to women whose inner lives were larger than the spaces available to them. In 2012 she published Dear Life, her final collection. In the foreword to that book she wrote that these might be the last stories she would publish. She was 81 years old and her eyesight was no longer reliable. She said she had said what she needed to say. The final 4 pieces in that collection are presented as autobiographical. They are closer to memoir than to fiction. They circle back to childhood, to the town, to the illness of her mother, to the long education and observation that had made her the writer she became. Then, on October 10, 2013, the Nobel Committee made its announcement. Alice Munro was sitting in the home of her daughter that morning when the telephone rang. It was a call from Stockholm. She later said, with characteristic dryness, that she had assumed it was a fraudulent call. The accent of the person calling sounded unfamiliar to her. She almost put the phone down. The Swedish Academy said she was the master of the contemporary short story. That she had raised the form to the highest possible artistic level. That her work recalled Chekhov. Coming from the Nobel Committee, that comparison to Chekhov is not casual praise. Chekhov is widely considered the greatest practitioner of the short story who ever lived. To be named in the same breath is to be placed in the most exclusive company in literary history. That year she was 82 years old. One of the oldest recipients of the Nobel Prize in Literature in the history of the award. And the first person from Canada ever to receive it. When the announcement reached Canada, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The people of Wingham, the small town where she had grown up, came into the streets. The bookshop that bore her name was surrounded by celebrating customers. The woman who had once been told by that small town to know her place had just been told by the Nobel Committee that her place was at the very top of world literature. The Nobel citation described her work in terms that have stayed with everyone who heard them. She illuminates the human condition with clarity and psychological realism. Her stories capture the essential contingency of human life. The way that lives turn on small decisions, half-noticed moments, chance encounters. She also changed the way the literary world thought about the short story. To understand what she actually gave her readers, it helps to think about what reading her feels like. You open a story and encounter a character, usually a woman, at some specific moment in her life. The writing is clear and precise and slightly cool, the way good prose always is. You begin to feel comfortable. You think you understand what kind of story this is and where it is going. And then something shifts. A detail is disclosed that reframes everything. Or the narrative suddenly moves back in time. Or a character you thought you understood reveals a dimension you had not anticipated. The floor tilts slightly. Not dramatically. Munro never reaches for theatrical effects. Just enough that you understand that you have been reading more shallowly than you thought. This is not a trick and it is not a game. It is a representation of how life actually feels when you pay close attention. The moment when you suddenly see someone you love differently. The realization that a story you have been telling yourself for years was not the whole story. The discovery that what you thought was ordinary was actually complex. These are the recognitions that her stories produce. And they are what make her stories so difficult to forget. Many readers have described picking up a Munro collection late at night, intending to read one story and finding that 2 hours have passed. And they have read the entire book. Not because the stories are page-turning thrillers, but because each one leaves you in a state where you immediately need to read the next one. You need to see whether that feeling of quiet illumination will come again. It always does. Her sentences have a quality that is easier to feel than to describe. They are economical in the way that a knife is economical. Shaped precisely for the task they are meant to perform. Nothing extra. Nothing that could be removed without losing something essential. Yet not sparse in the way that minimalism can sometimes feel cold. Her sentences are warm. They are written by someone who cares deeply about the people she is describing. And that care comes through in every line. This combination of precision and warmth is very rare. Most writing achieves one at the expense of the other. Precise writing tends to feel clinical. Warm writing tends to feel sentimental. Munro achieves both simultaneously. And that is perhaps the most fundamental reason why her work has lasted. And why it will continue to last long after most of the celebrated novels of her era have faded. She also changed the way the literary world thought about the short story. But she also has qualities that are entirely her own. She is the chronicler of a particular female experience. Of women who are intelligent and ambitious and emotionally complex. Living inside social structures that were designed without them in mind. She writes about desire that cannot be expressed. About intelligence that has nowhere to go. About the long, slow accumulation of feeling that daily life requires women to suppress. She spoke once about why she had dedicated her writing life to this subject. She said something that has since been quoted by countless women around the world. She said that the life of a woman is full of moments that history will never record. She said she wanted those moments to be remembered. That is her project in its entirety. Not epics. Not monuments. The preservation of what would otherwise vanish without a trace. After winning the Nobel Prize, she announced her retirement from writing. Before following her into that retirement, it is worth pausing on what she had actually accomplished. Because the scope of the achievement is easy to understate. She published her first book in 1968 and her last in 2012. Across those 44 years, she produced 14 story collections. That is not a large number by the standards of prolific writers. What is remarkable is the density and the consistency. There is almost nothing in the entire body of work that feels like a lesser achievement. There is no early period of apprenticeship followed by a mature period of mastery. From the first collection to the last, the work is serious and accomplished. She got better, certainly. But she started very good. She also changed the way the literary world thought about the short story. For most of the 20th century, the short story was treated as a minor form. Publishers were reluctant to take collections. Critics tended to regard story writers as novelists who had not yet committed to the longer form. The serious work of literature was assumed to happen in novels. Short stories were practice, or relaxation, or something you did between novels. Munro refused to accept this hierarchy. She never wrote a novel. She said she was not suited to that form. She said her way of thinking and feeling about life was organized around incidents and moments, not around the sustained trajectory that a novel requires. The short story, with its compression and its capacity for concentrated intensity, was the form that matched the way her mind worked. And she was going to make it do everything she needed it to do. Over the decades, critics and writers began to accept that she had succeeded. That the short story, in her hands, could carry as much weight as any novel. That the limitations of the form were actually a kind of power. That compression forces choices that expansion can avoid. That brevity forces precision. That leaving things out can be more powerful than putting them in. She also expanded the range of subjects that literature considered appropriate. Before Munro, the inner lives of ordinary women in small towns were not widely regarded as suitable subjects for serious literary art. She wrote about domestic experience from the inside, not as a backdrop for more dramatic events, but as the primary territory of investigation. She insisted that what happened in kitchens and bedrooms and across backyard fences was as important, as complex, as rich with meaning, as anything that happened in offices or on battlefields or in grand public arenas. That insistence changed things. It gave permission to generations of writers who came after her. Writers who wanted to take ordinary experience seriously. Writers who wanted to write about women without apologizing for the subject. Writers who understood that the local and the specific were pathways into the universal, not retreats from it. There is another dimension of her work that deserves attention. She wrote almost exclusively about the past. Not in the sense that her stories are set in historical periods, but in the sense that her characters are always looking back. Always trying to understand how they arrived where they are. Always sorting through accumulated memory to find meaning. This backward orientation gives her work a quality that is hard to name precisely. A feeling of weight, of sediment. The sense that every moment is dense with everything that came before it. That no present experience is free of its history. This is one of the things that makes her work feel so much larger than its pages. Because each story implies a whole life, not just an episode from one. After winning the Nobel Prize, she announced her retirement from writing. She said her eyes were giving her trouble. She said she was tired in a deep and earned way. She said she had nothing more she needed to say. And she kept that commitment. She retired to her small Ontario town. She went to the library. She had dinner with friends. She read the books of other writers. She stopped writing new ones. But the writing she had already done continued to work in the world. New generations of writers discovered her and were transformed by the discovery. The American author Jhumpa Lahiri said Munro showed her what the short story form could carry. The British author Ian McEwan called her one of the greatest living writers in the English language. The American author Jonathan Franzen said she was the writer he admired more than any other. These writers are not minor figures offering polite tributes. They are among the most important literary voices of our era. When writers of that stature speak about a predecessor with that kind of reverence, it tells you something definitive about where that predecessor stands in the tradition. In 2024, Alice Munro passed away at the age of 92. The response from around the world was immediate and heartfelt. The Canadian government spoke of an irreplaceable national voice. The New Yorker said she had changed the history of the short story form. Readers who had no connection to Canada or to the Ontario countryside she wrote about left tributes describing how her stories had accompanied them through their most difficult years. How she had made them feel understood when they believed themselves to be entirely alone. She is gone. But those women she wrote about are still there on the page. Those farm women in their kitchens. Those daughters watching mothers they could not save. Those women standing at windows in small towns, feeling things that the world around them had no language for. They are still there, alive in the work. And they will be there for as long as people read. What is the central lesson that Alice Munro leaves for anyone who makes things? It is this. You do not need a grand subject. You do not need a remarkable life or an extraordinary setting or access to history. You need only to go deep into the small world you know most intimately. Because inside that world, if you look at it honestly and without flinching, the story of all of humanity is waiting to be found. She spent her entire career writing about one corner of one province in one country. Those farms. Those churches. Those kitchen tables at midnight. Those women with their unspeakable inner lives. And from that small, particular, specific place, she extracted the loneliness that every human being has felt. The longing that runs underneath every ordinary life. The struggle to be seen, to be known, to be more than what the world decides you are. That is what great literature does. It takes the smallest vessel and fills it until it contains everything. It makes every reader who opens it feel that what is inside belongs to them personally. The next time you feel that your own experience is too small to matter, too ordinary to be interesting, too local to be universal, remember Alice Munro at her kitchen table, writing in the stolen hours of the night, with children sleeping nearby and no guarantee of time, writing those spare, dense, luminous sentences that changed the world. Your life contains that story too. You only have to be willing to look for it honestly. Not just in the dramatic moments. Not only in the turning points and the crises. But in the small, persistent, daily texture of living. The things you notice and do not say. The feelings you carry and do not name. The people you watch from a distance without letting them know you are watching. All of that is material. All of that is the raw substance from which serious writing is made. Alice Munro spent a lifetime proving it is enough. More than enough. Thank you for spending this time with me today, learning about this extraordinary and essential writer. I am Jenny. See you next time.